this right. All right, if you will, take your Bibles and open up to the book of Psalms. Psalm 1, we're still there. Is anybody new to our study tonight on the book of Psalms? Anybody here, this your first night? Okay, before you leave, if you want, over here on this front table, I have an intro to the book of Psalms that I put together. I do that for all the books. Y'all hang on, I've got to get this adjusted here. I do that for all the books that we overview. I'll get in my seat here in a second if y'all just bear with me. But this is on Psalms, and they're up here at the front table. If you don't have one and you want one, I think it'll be helpful just as an introduction. But we're in Psalm 1. I told you we're going to be here for just a couple of weeks because of the magnitude of this psalm. So many good psalms, and but we're going to talk some more about that tonight. Let me get this thing fired up here. All right, there we are. Okay, so we've been talking about what some refer to as the blessed man. That's how the psalmist refers to him, or the blessed person, the righteous person. They're contrasted against the wicked person. And the first thing we talked about was the posture of the blessed man. And we talked about the three aspects of that. He talks about his walk, which equaled behavior, three expressions of his posture. He walks not in the counsel of the wicked. We said walk always refers to behavior. So his behavior is not based on the counsel of the world, okay, how the world counsels us. The second thing about his posture was, we talked about, it says, nor stands in the way of sinners. That is standing in the, or fellowshipping with those that will take him down spiritually. And in order to belong, to be accepted, sometimes we'll compromise there. And so this is about belonging. And then third, where we sit. The righteous man, the blessed man, does not sit in the seat of scoffers. And I told you that's about belief. They're not influenced by those who mock God and who have disregard for the commands of God. And so those are the expressions of his posture. Now we're going to talk about something else. Well, let me go ahead and give it to you and tell you what I want us to begin with here. We're going to talk about the place of the blessed man. Now, if you look at verse 3, you'll see the place of the blessed man. And what is the place of the blessed man? Where does it say the blessed man or the blessed woman, the blessed person is? Where are they? They're planted by the streams. They're planted by the river. Now, I want to ask you a question because it says in verse 3 that he is like a tree that's planted by the streams. Now, here's my question for you as we get moving on a little bit. Why does the psalmist compare the righteous person to a tree? This is a commendable thing here, okay? So why does he compare the righteous person to a tree? What do you think? Okay, one at a time. Connie, I see that hand. Okay, because that's good, because they are rooted. How many of you were going to say rooted? Okay, a couple of you. They're rooted, all right? And so that means they're grounded, right? They have a good foundation. And that's true. You remember Jesus told a parable about the person that built their house on sand and the person that built their house on the rock. And both of those houses looked good on the surface. But only one of them stood the test, right? And that was the one that was built on the right foundation. The tree, the psalmist compares a righteous person to a tree planted by the stream, all right? representing they're rooted, they're grounded, they're founded. What else? All right, they're nourished. Near the water. That's important in that statement. It reflects something. Look, that even in a drought, the tree that's near the water will continue to have access to life. Right? Because its roots, it's rooted, so its roots go down, right? And they tap in. Do you know, even a riverbed that looks dry will have water deep down below it. A tree's roots can tap into the water that you and I don't even see. The tree's roots can tap in sometimes to the water that's flowing underground, an underground stream, and it taps in. So you can look at a tree sometimes in what appears to be a barren place, but it's near a riverbed, and even if the riverbed is dry, the tree still has access to the deep water. And so its roots draw that up, and so it's nourished. He says, so the righteous person is like a tree. They're grounded, they're founded, they have roots, and those roots are nourished below the surface, which is what gives them life. There's a lot of spiritual truth there about our souls being nourished so that they can be stable or stabilized. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But so the psalmist compares the righteous person to a tree that's rooted and nourished. What else? What? All right, it stands. And it stands because it's rooted. It stands because it's nourished, so it can do what it's supposed to do. And so if the wind blows, the tree stands. When the wind blew the two houses, only one stood, didn't it? The one that was built on the foundation, which we know is Jesus Christ. Paul talks about our foundation, how important that is. If you're going to stand, you're going to have to have that right foundation. Especially since there's a lot of errant teaching out there. You know, Paul dealt with that in the church a lot. And there's a lot out there. In fact, Paul even said some people were blown around by every wind of doctrine. Why? Because they really didn't have any roots. And so their roots didn't go down. You know, I talked Sunday about how God sometimes tests us to purify us. And sometimes he tests to reveal us. Remember the passage I quoted to you about, though we've all seen people who have come into the church and looked like they had entered the kingdom. Notice I said looked like they entered the kingdom. They can even speak the lingo. You know, Christians have their own lingo. It's called Christianese. And a lot of people know how to speak the Christianese. They sound right, they look right, but in time of testing, they don't stand. Parable of the soils is another example of that. And they don't stand, or some new wave of doctrine comes along, or some new compromising kind of theology, and they swallow that, or they believe that, maybe because they want that to be the way it is, and so they swallow that or accept it or something like that. But when the going gets tough, they don't stand. They can't stand. And John dealt with that. That's not a new thing. It's been going on as long as the church has existed. But John said, here's the truth. And he had to comfort some people because they were worried. These people, they came in with us and then they've left us. And John said they went out from us because they were never really one of us. In other words, they didn't have a foundation in Christ. They had the appearance, but they lacked the substance. See? You'll know when a tree is rooted because it will stand when the wind blows. It will stand in the test because it's rooted and it's nourished by something that others around can't even see. Um, Anything else you'd add to that? Why the psalmist uses this tree as a comparison for the righteous person? It grows. Look, very important. It does. It's rooted. It's nourished. It stands, but it grows. Right? I mean, it's doing something. So I'm reading this week in my time with the Lord. I'm reading the story of the cursed fig tree. You remember the story of the cursed fig tree? Jesus is coming into town, and he's hungry. And he sees a fig tree. Now, if you've ever been to the Holy Land, fig trees and olive trees are plentiful. And he sees a fig tree in leaf. And the disciples are watching him, and there's no figs on the tree. It's in leaf, but there are no figs. You remember what Jesus does? He curses it. And he said, "From you may no one ever eat again." Now, I don't have time to go into all of that. It sounds like, well, that's kind of mean because by the way, because it says, but it wasn't the season for figs. How's that for a conundrum? This is one of the most difficult passages scholars talk about in the New Testament. So why did Jesus curse a tree that has no figs when it wasn't fig-bearing season? Well, I'll tell you about that sometime. I don't know when. So I thought, I'm going to dig a little deeper on this. Because it does seem out of character. It seems almost harsh. Poor little fig tree. Yeah. Well, it probably had. It just didn't at that moment. And again, it wasn't the season for figs. So what's going on here? Well, first of all, he's teaching the disciples something, because when they leave the city and going out, the disciples are amazed because they look at the tree and it's all withered up. But here's what's going on. This is my take on it, which means it's right. Here's what's going on right there. The problem, and Jesus, I think, is making the point, it wasn't fig-bearing season, but the tree looked like it was fig-bearing season. It was leafed out like it is when it bears figs. Does that make sense? So, and Jesus looks at it, and it looks like it's supposed to have figs, even though it's not in season for figs. It's already leafed out, but there are no figs there. And I think there's an important lesson for us. There are those who look green and leafy, but there are no figs. And you may say, well, it may not be the season for figs. Yeah, well, then don't act like it. See, the tree was deceptive, wasn't it? Now, I got one other thing I'll share about it, I think the Lord put in my heart. The tree had deceived because it didn't have figs. Next, Jesus can curse whatever he wants to curse. But the big point, I think, is that it was appearing to be something that it wasn't. Jesus always addressed hypocrisy. Think about the Pharisees. He said, "You're whitewashed tombs." Why did he call them whitewashed tombs? They looked good on the outside, but there was nothing on the inside. Well, you say, well, it wasn't the season for whitewashed tombs. No. But let me tell you something now. Think about this. Have you ever thought about this? Maybe God created that tree. Would you agree? You ever thought about this? Just maybe God created the tree so it could become an illustration for the disciples and for us. And here's a weird thing. I don't know how plant life works with God. But what an honor if you're a fig tree God created with a purpose, to teach others a spiritual lesson. Just possible, isn't it? It's just possible that God said, I'm putting you there. You hang on, the day's going to come. And I'm going to use you to teach a lesson that's very important for my people to understand. And that is, number one, that I hate hypocrisy. And number two, don't pretend to be something that you are not spiritually. Does that make sense? It's a pretty tough thing. So the responsibility of the fig tree was to grow figs. And if it doesn't grow figs, it is worthless. Because that's its sole purpose, is to produce figs. Now, we can bring that home a little closer, maybe more uncomfortably. But you and I have been put on this earth to bear figs, to produce fruit. And when we don't, we are useless in the kingdom and for the purpose that God has put us here. Now, I don't know what your figs may be, but you're here on purpose. And the Pharisees could have been useful to God, but they were deceptive. They pretended to be something that they weren't. They weren't even close to what they pretended to be. And so Jesus didn't mind calling them out. Well, I want to move on, but I think those are some of the reasons that the psalmist compares the righteous person to a tree. Anything else you'd add to the list? Okay. All right. So I want to talk about that for just a few minutes. I got some other things I want to talk to you about too, if time permits. But so let's talk about the place of the blessed tree and why he's there. Well, he's there to stay strong, to be grounded, and it doesn't matter what comes. All right. But then we see a third thing. We see let me get my pen going up here, the product. And that's really kind of what we just talked about, the product of the blessed man. What's the product of the blessed man? Fruit. Fruit is the product. And that goes back to what I just said. You've been put here to produce figs. Whatever your figs are, God expects you to produce them, all right? And so here's what is necessary, though, is to be standing in the right place. That means to be where God wants you to be so you can do what God designed you to do. Does that make sense? And that, of course, means you understand what kind of tree you are. See, and the Bible makes very clear, Paul makes very clear in 1 Corinthians 12 that there are some common kinds of fruit that we should produce. The fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, self-control. These are the kinds of fruits that all of us that should be happening in our life. Maybe not fully formed, but developing. But there's also the kind of fruit that results from the way God has designed us. It's why we're also so different. As God has designed us, and he's designed us with these gifts and these abilities and these fruits, and those things are to work in concert together. All of us together producing our fruit creates a healthy body of Christ. And so the product is our fruit. So you got to know what kind of tree you are, which means you got to know what are my abilities and gifts, and how can I use them in service to God. When you use yours and I use mine, and you use yours and you use yours, they come together, it causes the body to work the way it's supposed to, which is why you don't have to worry about what somebody else's gifts are. You've just got to understand what yours are and maximize them. You don't have to be a copycat of someone else. God doesn't want you to be a copycat of someone else. He wants for you to be fully His living out the purpose that he created you for. So you got to know what kind of tree you are. Y'all all know, man, 24 years, I've told you this story a few times. I had a grapefruit tree in Florida. See? Y'all remember, don't you? A pink grapefruit tree. A very abundant pink grapefruit tree. My neighbors had tangelos and oranges, tangerine trees. I like those things, but I hate grapefruit. I tried to love grapefruit. I really did. I bought a juicing machine. I told Allison, we got all these. We're going to make grapefruit juice. Maybe, just maybe. Fresh, squeezed grapefruit juice. How many of y'all like grapefruits? Yeah. My dad loved them. I would say, Dad, come and get them. I tried all these kind of things. But I wanted it to be a tangelo tree. That's what I wanted. I wanted it. And I would go out there some days in our backyards where it was. And, you know, and when I cut the grass, by the way, I've told you this before, it's like running over cannonballs. It's a wonder I didn't tear our house down, you know, with those things hitting the house. And they were big, you know. And I would clip that tree, which was dumb. I was young, and I'd clip that tree. And guess what it would do? It had the audacity to produce more. And I wish I had have thought about the cursed fig tree story. I might have tried to invoke it on that tree. I wanted it to be something else. And you know, I could go out there and say, you are no longer a grapefruit tree. You are now a tangelo tree. I have declared it. Produce tangelos. And you know what? The next crop would be grapefruit. Because a grapefruit tree is going to produce grapefruit. It doesn't matter what I want it to be, it's going to produce grapefruit. I had a lot of conversations with that tree. But I never could convince it to be something other than a grapefruit tree. You know, a lot of times Christians, they're trying to be something other than the tree God made them. Yeah. Yeah. Yep, that's right. Yep. Yep. That's true. And everybody was thankful for that. Um, yeah. Covering. A covering, yeah. Absolutely. Lots of them over in Israel. Lots of fig trees. But you understand, so the product is what, class? The big picture here is the product is the fruit that you are supposed to produce. And notice that the psalmist doesn't pick out which fruit. It just declares that the righteous man or woman, they're founded, they're nourished, they're growing, and the result of growth is fruit. And I want you to see something else before I move to the last thought in this section. Well, I got several other thoughts for the last in this particular sequence, but I want you to get something else, because this helped me. This was one of those moments in my ministry years ago, several decades ago, that was an aha moment for me. And it came from this psalm. And it says, it yields its fruit in its season. In its season. And that helped me so much, because we have seasons. So I'm in a meeting with a man I'm mentoring today, and so I'm asking him some questions, and he says, I'm in a weird place right now. There's been some changes in his life, and some the things that he had commitments to, and that sort of thing. And I said to him, this is just a season. And I said, what you've got to do now is understand what season it is. So we jokingly said at the start of our time tonight, we've experienced all 4 seasons in a week. But I believe there are spiritual seasons in your life. And I believe it's very important. And notice that the tree produces fruit, but it doesn't produce fruit all the time. The healthy tree produces fruit when? In its season. And that'll be true in your life. This will help you sometimes if you feel like, look, if you're in a dry spell spiritually, it's a season. Now, it can stay there if you don't understand what you need to do, right? But it is a season. There are seasons of drought, right? Ask California about that. There are seasons. And one of the things about fruit is your fruit there will be fruit in season, different seasons. It helped me in ministry. I never could figure out when I was a young pastor, I never could figure out, God, why aren't we having fruit all the time in the church? And the devil would use that against me. The devil would whisper and say, well, you're not doing something right. Or you're not praying enough. Or you need to be a better leader. Or you're not preaching the right stuff. Or if you were, there'd be fruit. Well, a couple of thoughts that'll help you. Well, and finally, and I was reading one morning, and it suddenly just overwhelmed me. Wait a minute. I'm not in that season right now, and it's actually okay. The key is that I be stable. Stay tapped into the stream. Because now, here's the next thought for you. Has it ever occurred to you that even when there's not fruit hanging off the limb, before that happens, fruit is still in the process? Right? It doesn't just all of a sudden go boom. The process is happening. We just say, oh, I can see the fruit. But the fruit is in development in harvest time and out of harvest time. Does that make sense? So the key is that you are tapped into the stream, which is feeding your spiritual roots, that is causing the fruit to grow. And then guess what? In the right time, the fruit will manifest. In a physical kind of way or in a spiritual kind of way, the fruit. It may be something internally spiritual where the fruit is produced. It may be something physiological where the fruit is produced. A life that is changed or something like that. There's a lot of different kinds of fruit. But what it'll do is when you get discouraged and you say, well, God, it just doesn't seem like you're making any difference, or God, it doesn't seem like you're using me, or God, what? And so it's a season. Stay tapped into the stream. It's a season. And all seasons are necessary. Aren't they? We think about the harvest season, but we forget there's the planting season, there's the cultivating season, and all of these things have to happen, and the growing, and all of these have to happen before the harvest. It's just hard not to fixate on the harvest, isn't it? Now, there are some harvests that have been waiting to be harvested. Jesus said, looking at the fields, they're already white unto harvest. That means there's some fruit that's ready to be picked. But he said the laborers are few. But there's some fruit that's ready to be picked. Pray to the Lord that he send the workers into the fields to harvest the harvest. So there's a harvest out there. And you have to be a little bit careful with this analogy, because the season thing in particular doesn't mean, well, there are 4 seasons with God. But the analogy is that fruit is produced in its season, and that's true in your life spiritually. So you're going to have some seasons where everything seems to be. Now I'm an old pastor. And you know what I've learned? If it's not a highly productive season right now, God's growing stuff, and then it'll happen. Just stay tapped into the right source. Stay nourished. And God in season will produce the crop. Does that make sense? And so it helped me immensely. I don't know where you may be right now in your relationship with the Lord. You may be in a season where you're very discouraged. Look, take heart. Stay tapped into the stream. And in due season, we will reap. Do you notice that? If we don't grow weary. You may be discouraged. You may be weary. You may be in a season where God is just really doing some amazing things. Now listen, rejoice in that. Celebrate that, but don't get drunk on it. Right? Because then the devil will tell you the next time a season is not so exciting, something's wrong with you. Does that make sense? That helped me so much. And has continued to help me through the years. And now I've shared it with hundreds of people and other pastors. I've just shared, look, what season? What kind of tree are you and what kind of season are you in? You had a thought? Yeah. It's amazing that doesn't translate into taste. The blooms, it was a beautiful tree. It really was. And if you were a grapefruit, folks, you would have been so proud of that tree. You know, you would have said that is the finest grapefruit tree I've ever seen. The blooms, it was beautiful. It was highly productive, but I just didn't like it. Hmm. Yes. Yeah, you don't know. Yeah, that's good. Um, the word is this. Y'all just hang with me about 5 more minutes. We'll be gone. That's a good word. You don't. Here's the thing about fruit. You sometimes are producing fruit and you don't even realize it. I got this neat letter from a man in this church, a young man. Well, a young, yeah. There's now people are young. Um, he's in his late 30s, early 40s. It is. I agree. And he sent me this letter this week. He said, he actually passed me on Sunday. He said, have you checked your email? And I said, uh, he said, did you get one from me? I said, no. He said, check your junk mail. And I did. And I said, no, there was nothing there. He said, I'm going to send you something I want you to know. So he relates, and I'll make it as quick as possible. He relates his story to me. He said, um, he works in our media ministry. And he said, when I started coming here, by the way, he said, I had no interest in God. He said, I was on drugs off the charts. I'd been arrested. I had felonies. I had alcohol problems. And he said, I've been found in the gutter and all of this. And he's a young man. And he said, I had no interest in spiritual things, but a member brought him to church and was talking to him about Jesus. And he said, I came and he said, the Lord began to speak to me through the messages and that sort of stuff, and he gave his life to Christ. And he said, and then you asked for people to serve in various capacities. This was several years ago, and he said, and so I thought, well, I'm going to do that. And he got involved with the media ministry. He knew nothing about it, television ministry, anything. But he said, I got saved. I was excited. He said, close people in my life, were telling me not to. I was now working on a master's degree. I was holding down 2 jobs. I had all these, and he listed out all these things he was engaged in, but he said, I just felt compelled to serve the Lord in the church. And so he said, and so I committed to work in the media, and even though I didn't know anything, and he said, but it was through Ridgecrest and the call to service, and that I realized that God could use me. And he said, I began to study these things, and he's a realtor now in the city, but he has a second job, and it is in television production as an independent contractor. He says, and because of what happened to me at Ridgecrest and learning me, he said, I'm now producing pieces for the Olympics, for several of the major ESPN, several of the major networks. He is now an independent contractor producing video that he has produced, they are using. And he said it all began with what Ridgecrest meant to me, what God did in my life, and the call to service. I wrote him back. I said, I didn't know that. I didn't know any of that. But I said, thank you for telling me. I said, can I share your story sometime? He said, absolutely. I said, I won't use your name. He said, you can use my name. He said, as weird as it is, he says, because what God has done in my life is now a badge of honor to me. And he said, I don't mind whoever knows my story. But I didn't know that. I didn't, I saw him sitting out there, but I didn't know the fruit that God was producing, right? So sometimes fruit is being produced out of your life, and you may not. I'm convinced that you're going to see a lot of fruit in heaven that you didn't know about, and you're going to, it's going to probably blow your mind to say, God used me? It was me that God used? So, look, I'm going to give you this last point because it's just real brief, but I just want to encourage you about the seasons and the fruit in your life. Here's the last thing, we're done. I want you to see the path of the blessed man or the blessed woman. And that's in the very last statement in verse 6. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. There are 2 paths. In the end, when all is said and done, there are only 2 paths. There are only 2 roads. Jesus told us what they were. There is a narrow path that leads to life, and there's a broad path that leads to destruction. And he said of the narrow path, few be that find it. You remember that passage? He talks about the way of the righteous. You know what he's pointing to? Look, we'll move to another psalm next week, but I'm not finished with this one. I have a few more things I want to show you, but I want you to get this. Jesus, or the psalmist contrasts the way of the righteous against the way of the wicked. And how do you distinguish the righteous man or woman from the wicked man or woman? You know, I told you when I first started talking about this song, the wicked, he uses that word a couple of times. People say, well, I know lost people, and they're not wicked. You do understand that they belong to a wicked father. And by extension, that makes them wicked. Now, I won't advise you to walk up and say, you know, you're wicked. We can change that, but you're wicked. But you need to understand in the theology and the economy of God, there are only two kinds of people: the righteous and the unrighteous, the saved and the lost. There are only 2 roads: the path of the wicked or the path of the righteous. Those are the only 2 roads. There's not an in-between road. There's not a look. You either get it right in this life or you don't get it right. There's no, as some people like to say, well, there's this kind of in between, you know, And there will be this gap between here and eternity. No, there won't. Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise. Not in a few years, maybe, if somebody gives enough in the offering plate, they can kick you out of purgatory and move you into heaven. No, there are two paths. And the one you choose makes all the difference. You remember the poem by Robert Frost? Two roads that diverged, and I took the one less traveled by, and it's made all the difference. Isn't that a great poem? It's called The Road Less Traveled, and I chose the one less traveled by. It's made all the difference. That's what Jesus says. That's what the psalmist is pointing out to us. The path of the blessed. How do you know the blessed or the righteous man or woman? You look and see which path they're on. You say, well, how do I know which path they're on? Thank you for taking us back to the fruit. By their fruit, you will know them. You will know them. Okay, we'll stop there. I'm not finished with this psalm. I told you we're going to be here a few weeks. Now, I got one more little segment that we'll probably knock out next week, and then we'll move on to another psalm. You have any questions, any thoughts before we go about any of that we've talked about? Okay. All right, is anybody here tonight and you're not sure if you died, you'd go to heaven? And you say, I'd like to take care of that. I want to pick the road less traveled by. Many are called, few are chosen. Anybody here tonight and you say, I'm on the right path?